Hello everyone, I'm Ixalan. Welcome back to Limited Review Week here on my channel. So far this week I've looked at all 5 colors in Ixalan, looked at all the cards in those colors, and today we're finally going to get to the end of the Limited Review. We're going to look at the last cards in the set, and those are the multicolored cards, the artifacts, and the lands. This is not the last video in my whole Limited Review though, it is in the full set part of it. Tomorrow I will be posting an archetype guide talking about the different synergies within each of the color pairs or shards and so forth. So just a quick reminder, these videos are based on my impressions of the cards before actually getting to play with them. Obviously, the pre-release isn't even here yet. It's based on past experience with Limited. I've been playing Limited for a very long time. So let's go ahead and jump into the first card and see what it is. It is Admiral Beckett Brass, which is 1 generic mana, 1 blue, 1 black, and 1 red. The Grixis colors, basically. And it is a 3/3 legendary human pirate at Mythic Rare. It has a large, impressive text box as well. It says other pirates you control get +1/+1. At the beginning of your end step, gain control of target non-land permanent controlled by a player who has dealt combat damage by 3 or more pirates this turn. So a pirate lord is nice. There's lots of pirates running around in this set. It's a tribe that's across 3 colors instead of just 2 like some of them in this set. While it might seem sort of hard to cast, I don't think she will be. Pirates that make treasure are all over the place in this set, so casting her off a splash won't really be very hard. She's also quite powerful, allowing you to steal your opponent's permanents if you hit them with 3 pirates a turn. Obviously, you need like 10 or more pirates to really take advantage of Beckett, but she's an absolute bomb once you're there. A little dangerous to first pick in case pirates isn't open. I still think it is probably worth doing though, just because she offers such insane upside for a pirate deck, and it seems like a really fun and effective way to start a draft. I'm going to give her an A-. Next we have Belligerent Bronto, which for 5 generic mana, 1 green and 1 white, is a 4/6 dinosaur at uncommon, and it says each creature you control assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So there are uncommons in basically every limited format these days that are called signpost uncommons. They are meant to sort of embody what a particular color pair is supposed to be about in the limited format, and Belligerent Bronto is the signpost uncommon for green-white. Unfortunately, I think it's one of the worst signpost uncommons we've ever seen. I really wanted to like this card, but the whole Toughness Matters theme just doesn't show up enough on other cards in this set. Despite the fact that this is supposed to be the signpost uncommon for green-white, it effectively makes a 7 mana 6/6, and yeah, maybe it will make some of your other creatures better, but it just isn't going to be well supported enough. It's not going to be that easy to build a deck that really takes advantage of this text box. I haven't ever given a signpost uncommon a grade lower than C+. Most of them are at least that, but this one's just a flat C, and honestly I think maybe I should go even lower. I would be pleasantly surprised if green-white is a real deck. Green-white high toughness is a real deck in the format, but I think most of the time it's just going to be a dinosaur deck, not one that focuses on high toughness, and this dinosaur is not very good in that deck. It's just doesn't have good stats. Alright. Next we have Call to the Feast, which for 2 generic, 1 white, and 1 black is an uncommon sorcery that says create 3 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink. This is the signpost uncommon for black-white, which is all about vampires. 4 mana to make 3 cards, even if they're just 1/1 tokens with lifelink, is pretty potent. Plus, there are a ton of vampire synergies in this set. I don't think this quite pushes into the first pick, even though it's gold category, but it's close. I'm going to give it a C+. Next, we have Deadeye Plunderers, which for 3 generic, 1 blue, and 1 black, is a human pirate, a 3/3 at uncommon. And it says Deadeye Plunderers gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. Also has an activated ability where you can pay 2 generic, 1 blue, and 1 black to create a colorless treasure artifact token. And those tokens you can tap and sacrifice to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. This is the signpost uncommon for blue-black, which is all about pirates and treasure. This gets bigger the more treasure you have. Keep in mind, by the way, it works for all artifacts. I just say treasure because that's the most common way this gets big, but if you have equipment or vehicles around, that'll work too. And it has a mana sink ability that just lets you make more and more treasures. Seems pretty solid, though I don't think it is, again, quite the kind of gold card you want to first pick. If you're in these colors, though, it's going to be a great card in your deck. I'm going to give it a C+. Next we have Direfleet Captain, which for 1 black and 1 red is a 2/2 orc pirate at uncommon, and it says whenever Direfleet Captain attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each other attacking pirate. This one is a signpost uncommon for red-black, which is all about being aggressive with pirates. This will often be quite large in combat if you're swinging with several pirates, and even in a fail case, it's a 2 mana 2/2 pirate. Still, when it attacks, while it can get large, it doesn't have an evasive ability or anything, so chump blocking it isn't that difficult. It's not really like a game-breaking uncommon, even in a heavy pirate deck, but it's a good one. I'm going to give it a C+. Next, we have Gishath, Sun's Avatar, which is 5 generic mana, 1 red, 1 green, and 1 white, the Naya Shard, for a mythic rare legendary dinosaur avatar who's a 7/6 with trample, vigilance, and haste. I've already said a lot, but there's a lot more to be said. It also says whenever Gishath's son's avatar deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library. Put any number of dinosaur creature cards from among them onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So the text box basically says you win, more or less. I mean, that's how ridiculous this card is. It's very cool. It allows you to just play dinosaurs for free from your deck while being a large monster with trample, vigilance, and haste is nice. Trample means it's going to be hard for your opponent not to take combat damage. Costing 8 is kind of a downer, but between treasures and more traditional ramp, which is what you'll be doing more often in the dinosaur deck, he won't be that hard to cast. Keep in mind that the 3 colors that Gishath is in are very low on treasures, though, so relying on those and thinking I'm going to get some treasures to make this work isn't going to go real well, because red does not have, it has 2 cards with treasures. One's rare and one's uncommon, and the other 2 colors don't have anything with treasures. If you get him in play and connect a couple of times, though, you're going to win. Costing 8 across 3 colors keeps me from giving him an A, because obviously in terms of raw power, he's just going to end the game. But I am going to give him a B, and I think it's a good way to start a draft just because the ceiling is insane. So if you can make it work, you're going to be pretty happy. And if you can't, I mean, you know, there are worse things. So B, Gishath's a B. It's a great card. Next, we have Hostage Taker, which for 2 generic, 1 blue and 1 black is a 2/3 human pirate at rare. And it says, when Hostage Taker enters the battlefield, exile target artifact or creature until Hostage Taker leaves the battlefield. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. Well, this card's dumb. So dumb that Wizards had to errata it already so that it can't exile itself. But seriously, this is like Fiend Hunter plus Gonti, Lord of Luxury. Both are insane cards. If you cast what you exile, your opponent won't be getting back anything when they kill Hostage Taker, and that's insane. It's an absolute bomb, worth picking first, even though it's gold, and A all the way. It's just a very strong removal spell, perhaps the strongest spot removal spell in the entire set, because it effectively allows you to steal your opponent's best creature. Next, we have Huatli, Warrior Poet, which for 3 generic, 1 red and 1 white, is a legendary planeswalker. A Huatli, legendary planeswalker. It's on a mythic rare, has 3 starting loyalty, and has a +2 ability that says you gain life equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. It has a 0 ability. Create a 3/3 green dinosaur creature token with trample, and it has a -X ability. Huatli Warrior Poet deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures. Creatures dealt damage this way can't block this turn. This is a great planeswalker. Cranking out a 3/3 dinosaur every turn is a good way to protect yourself or just help you win. The +2 is not the most exciting thing ever, but honestly it can sometimes help you get ahead from being behind because you play it and say you have a 6/6 in play. You +2 Huatli to being 5, and your opponent can't really attack you because you probably have a 6/6 in play still. So it isn't going to be the most used ability, but it's not a bad idea to use it. And the best reason to use the +2 is because you can use the -X effect eventually, which is insane. I mean, you can use it the turn she comes down too if you have to. And you get to damage any number of things, X damage. I mean, you have to divide X. You don't get to do X to each. But they also can't block. So you can set up a turn where you just do like 4, 1 to each of your opponent's creatures, and none of their creatures can block. So Huatli is very powerful, and definitely a first pick. Very strong. She's an A. There's not much more to say about her. You should first pick her. It doesn't matter that she's gold. Make it work. Next, we have Marauding Looter, which for 2 generic, 1 blue and 1 red is a 4/3 human pirate at uncommon. And it has Raid, which is a keyword ability in this set that basically means if you attacked, you get to do something else. And in this case, if you attacked with a creature, you get to draw a card and discard a card, or loot, which is cool because this actually has Looter in its name. A 4-mana 4/3 is already a solid raid. Coming with a repeatable raid effect that lets you loot makes this even better. It's not the kind of raid that only works when it comes into play. It's the kind of raid that happens every turn. Blue-red seems to be the color pair most interested in raiding too, so it will work well there. Not quite on the level of a first pickable gold card, at least most of the time, but it's close, and I'm going to give her a B-. Next, we have Raging Swordtooth, which for 3 generic, 1 red, and 1 green is a 5/5 dinosaur at uncommon with trample, and when Raging Swordtooth enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each other creature. Wow, this is the signpost common for red-green, and it is a first pickable gold card. A 5-mana 5/5 trampler that does 1 to everything is already great and would be in any set and would already be a first pickable card, I think. A huge creature who picks off a small guy or 2 sounds pretty good, but this set also has the enrage mechanic, which is what this is really seeking to tell you to do, because red-green is where you have the most enrage. It does have downside, of course. like triggering your opponents in rage or killing your guys with 1 toughness. But if you're the one drafting this deck at your table, not a lot of enrage is going to get away from you. I like this as a first pick. I'm going to give it a B. Next, we have Regisaur Alpha, which for 3 generic, 1 red, and 1 green is a 4/4 dinosaur rare. And it says other dinosaurs you control have haste. And when Regisaur Alpha enters the battlefield, create a 3/3 green dinosaur creature token with trample. Another first pickable gold card, Regisaur Alpha, is a 5 mana 4/4 that gives other dinos haste, and yeah, it also brings with it a 3/3 dinosaur token with trample, who will also have haste. So that means you're paying 5 mana for 7/7 worth of power, 3 of which has trample and haste. Yeah, that's insane. This is good even in a deck with 0 dinosaurs, and then if you have dinosaurs, it's ridiculous. It's like an A on its own, and definitely an A+ if it's a dinosaur deck, because that's just crazy. Next, we have Shapers of Nature, which for 1 generic, 1 green, and 1 blue is a 3/3 Merfolk Shaman at uncommon, and it has 2 activated abilities. One, you can pay 3 generic and a green to put a +1/+1 counter on something, and the other is 2 generic and a blue to remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature you control and draw a card. This card reminds me a lot of Simic Guildmage from back in the day. Like the Mage, it is the signpost uncommon for the blue-green archetype, which is all about explore, merfolk, and +1/+1 counters. As a 3 mana 3/3 is actually a pretty good rate and has some powerful activated abilities here. Putting counters on things and drawing cards is pretty nice. It can make combat a nightmare if you just have like 8 mana up. I could see myself first picking this in a weaker pack, and I'm going to give it a B-. Next, we have Skyterror, which for 1 red and 1 white is a 2/2 dinosaur at uncommon, and it has flying and menace. As usual, the red-white signpost uncommon is just a hyper-aggressive creature that will basically be difficult to block or it hits you really hard. Since having 2 flying creatures isn't going to be super common in this case, blocking it isn't going to be easy. It's a nice attacker for an aggro deck. It's good at enabling rage, but it's still not a gold card you really want to go out of your way to take and warp your draft around, so I think it's only a C+. Next, we have Onna, Butcher of McGann, which for 3 generic, 1 white, and 1 red is a 4/4 legendary vampire knight at mythic rare. It has vigilance and lifelink, and you can tap it to pay 7 life to destroy target non-land permanent. Activate this ability only during your turn. So this is another gold card that is powerful enough that you should first pick it. A 5 mana 4/4 vigilance and lifelink is already pretty nice. But oh hey, he can also just nuke non-land permanents for the cost of 7 life. You do have to do it on your turn, but because he has vigilance, attacking, and then using his ability in the same turn is pretty doable. He also just gained 4, so paying 7 is not so bad. And I'm going to give him an A-. First pick him in almost all packs, except for the cards, of course, that are just straight up A's. Next, we have Raska, Relic Seeker, which for 4 generic, 1 green, and 1 black is a legendary planeswalker, Raska. Mythic rare with 6 starting loyalty. Her +2 says create a 2/2 black pirate creature token with menace. Her -3 says destroy target artifact, creature, or enchantment. Create a colorless treasure artifact token. And the -10 is target player's life total becomes 1. Yeah, this one's nuts. I think it's probably the most powerful card in the set. It is 2 colors. That's the one thing that keeps it from being like definitely the most powerful card, but it's crazy. She can make pirate tokens with menace or destroy artifacts, creatures, or enchantments while also giving you treasure. Her ultimate is honestly not the most exciting one, but from time to time you'll be able to use that and kill your opponent. Most of the time though, just +2ing and -3ing is what you're going to be doing here. And the high loyalty she has when she starts and she goes up to 8 and makes a pirate means she's probably going to live at least another turn. She's an A all around, maybe even an A+. First pick her and do what you can to play her. That does it for the multicolored cards. Now let's move to artifacts. First up, we have Cobbled Wings, which for 2 generic mana is an artifact equipment at common. And it has equipped creature, has flying, and that equip cost is 1. So we've seen this before, and it was pretty bad then, and it'll probably be worse now, because last time we saw it, there were creatures who got bonuses when they were equipped. That's not the case in this set. I guess the joke here is that you can put it on a creature so that you can trigger raid or something, and there are a few cards that just care about artifacts in this set, but this just isn't a boost that's worth it most of the time. It's slow and low impact. I'm going to give it an F. Next, we have Dusk Legion Dreadnought, which for 5 generic mana is an artifact vehicle at uncommon and has vigilance and crew 2. They've powered down vehicles a ton this time around, and this is a good example. 5 mana for a 4/6 with vigilance isn't like an insane rate. I mean, it's pretty good, but compared to what we saw last time around with vehicles, it's not that insane. This makes you crew it too, and while the crew cost is low, I just can't get over this thing costing 5 for such mediocre stats. I'm just going to give it a C-. I could see it maybe getting up to C or C+, but I'm pretty low on the card right now. Next, we have Elaborate Fire Cannon, which for 2 generic mana is an artifact at uncommon. And it says Elaborate Fire Cannon doesn't untap during your untap step. Well, it better do something great, right? Well, it doesn't really. For 4 generic mana, you tap it, and Elaborate Fire Cannon deals 2 damage to target creature or player. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you may discard a card. If you do, untap Elaborate Fire Cannon. I do really love the design on this card. I think it's a very interesting design. It's certainly elaborate, you know, it's very on point with flavor. I just wish they decided to print it in a set that had a Graveyard Matters or discard theme. Imagine this with Madness in the set, for example. In this set, I don't see this being all that good. 6 mana to do 2 damage to a creature or player, and then having to unload a card on your upkeep to untap it just doesn't seem that great. In the late game, it gets a little better. You can start pitching extra lands, but come on, this is still pretty terrible, especially at all other stages of the game, and I'm going to give it an F. Next, we have Fell Flagship, which for 3 generic mana is an artifact vehicle at rare. It's a 3/3. It says pirates you control get +1/+0, and whenever Fell Flagship deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card, and it has crew 3. This vehicle might have a relatively high crew cost of 3, but it brings enough extra stuff to the table to be worth playing. Pumping all your pirates is nice, and means they can more easily crew this thing. Making your opponent discard something every time it hits them is good too. This is like a C in a deck with no pirates, without enough pirates at least, because I think having the ability to make your opponent discard cards is awesome. This is a B- though in a deck that's heavy in pirates. And it's not the worst first pick ever because it has a decent floor and a relatively high ceiling, and it's colorless. Although if you're taking it, you're kind of locking yourself into one of the pirate color pairs or the pirate shard. But I think it's an okay first pick. Next, we have Gilded Sentinel, which for 4 generic mana is an artifact creature golem at common, and it's a 3/3. This is a really boring card, and it's not really good either. You can probably run mediocre 4-drops that actually have relevant creature types over this. There are a few cards that care about artifacts, and I guess in a world where you have multiple copies of those cards, this becomes slightly better, but I'm just going to give it an F. Next, we have Hierophant's Chalice, which for 3 generic mana is a common artifact, and it says, when Hierophant's Chalice enters the battlefield, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, and you can tap it to add one colorless mana to your mana pool. So, ramping is a big deal in this format, and this helps you do that. It only produces colorless mana, though, which is kind of a bummer, especially coming off a format that had Manalith. But, you know, I guess we have treasure and stuff, so they didn't want to give us too many ways to splash. But I think this will be fine to run in a ramp deck. The fact that it makes your opponent lose 1 and you gain 1 is not going to really matter that much. Obviously, it's better than if it didn't say that, but not much better. You will probably cut it the minute you get some other better source of ramp, though, so I think that means it's a D. Next, we have Pillar of Origins, which for 2 generic mana is an uncommon artifact. It says, as Pillar of Origins enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type. I actually don't love this card for limited, since it can only produce mana for use on creature spells of the name type. That means it can't produce mana for your instants or sorceries or enchantments, and that means it will frequently end up sort of just not producing as much mana as you'd like. However, if you end up in a deck jammed full of creatures of one type, which is doable in this format, and not many non-creature spells, it will be playable, especially if it's a dinosaur deck, because it gives you a source of fixing. But I'm not willing to give it more than a C- right now, although I guess I should have put a build around grade here. It probably does move up to a B- in a deck that's like way into one creature type. Next, we have Pirate's Cutlass, which for 3 generic mana is an artifact equipment at common, and it says, when Pirate's Cutlass enters the battlefield, attach it to target pirate you control. Equipped creature gets +2/+1, and it has equip 2. Even in a pirate deck, this is a little bit too clunky. Sure, you get to equip it for free once if you have a pirate, but after that, paying 2 to equip it for a +2/+1 bonus just doesn't seem like enough to me. I do think it is a playable piece of equipment, but only just. It will be at its best in the blue-black pirate deck, as there are a few cards there that are pirates who actually care about artifacts, so you're going to get some extra mileage out of this thing, but I'm only going to give it a D. Next, we have Prying Blade, which for 1 generic mana is an artifact equipment at common, and it says equipped creature gets +1/+0. It also says, whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, create a colorless treasure artifact token, and you can equip it for 2. Another fairly underwhelming piece of equipment. Prying Blade costs 1, which is nice, but paying 2 to equip it for such a small boost doesn't appeal to me. Sure, you get to make treasure every time your creature hits your opponent, but a +1/+0 boost isn't normally going to help you hit your opponent. But since this doesn't grant an evasive ability as well, you will have to be putting it on an already evasive creature. If you have lots of flyers, this definitely gets better, but I think it's a D. I don't think most of the time you want to be playing it. Next, we have Sentinel Totem, which for 1 generic is an uncommon artifact, and it says, when Sentinel Totem enters the battlefield, scry 1, and you can tap it and exile the totem to exile all cards from all graveyards. This doesn't really have a place in this format. It's a card that was probably printed to help out decks in constructed formats like Standard or Modern. Graveyards are not a big resource in this format, with only a few cards caring about them at all in the whole set, so exiling graveyards will have a minimal effect. Scry 1 is a thing, I guess, but not worth playing on a card that basically does nothing else. I'm just going to give this an F. Next, we have Shadowed Caravel, which for 2 generic mana is an artifact vehicle at rare. It's a 2/2. Whenever a creature you control explores, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Shadowed Caravel, and it has crew 2. This is a pretty sweet Explorer build around. In a deck without Explore, though, it's a pretty bad vehicle. I mean, crewing with a creature with the same power as the Caravel is just bad. I think it's probably in an F in a deck with 0 cards with Explore. If you can manage to get like 7 or more cards with Explore, it gets a lot better, moving all the way up to a B-, because you get to the point where you're crewing for only 2, but your Caravel's now a 5/5, and that's pretty nice. Next, we have Sleek Schooner, which for 3 generic mana is a 4/3 artifact vehicle at uncommon with crew 1. I think this is the best of the common and uncommon vehicles in this set, mostly because it has the very low cost of crew 1. We saw in Kaladesh block that crew 1 is hard to go wrong with, and while this is powered down compared to the vehicles we saw in that set, this is the kind of card that basically any creature-based deck is going to play in this format. It isn't even a terrible first pick since it's colorless. I'm going to give it a B-. Next, we have Sorceress Spyglass. For 2 generic mana is an artifact at rare, and it says, as Sorceress Spyglass enters the battlefield, look at an opponent's hand, then choose any card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. This is another card that was definitely printed with constructed in mind. Sorceress Spyglass is pretty terrible and limited. There's no guaranteeing that your opponent has a card in hand with an activated ability, and since you don't know enough about your opponent's deck most of the time, you're not going to be able to shut it down. Anything really, and even shutting down an activated ability isn't really enough in limited. You want a card that just prevents your opponent from playing the card at least, because if they play it and it's still like a 5/5 with an activated ability, it doesn't really matter. So this is just an F. Next, we have Vanquishers Banner, which for 5 generic mana is a rare artifact, and it says, as Vanquishers Banner enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Whenever you cast a creature spell of the chosen type, draw a card. Vanquisher's Banner is definitely a build around, but not an ultra narrow one. If you're playing any of the tribal decks in this format, which cover about 8 different color pairs in the format, this is going to be good. An Anthem effect for most of your creatures and making it so they all draw you cards when you cast them is great. This is just going to win you the game in the long run. Because of the heavy tribal theme in this set, I like the idea of spending a first pick on this, and I think it's a solid B. So that does it for the single-faced artifacts. Now let's move to the double-faced ones. First up, we have Conqueror's Galleon, which for 4 generic mana is a 2/10 vehicle at rare, and it says, when Conqueror's Galleon attacks, exile it at the end of combat, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control, and it has crew 4. So what it transforms into is Conqueror's Foothold, which is a land, and you can tap it to add colorless mana to your mana pool. You can pay 2 and tap it to loot, draw a card and discard. You can pay 4 and tap it to draw a card, or you can pay 6 and tap it to return a card from your graveyard to your hand. Any card, not just a creature card. So this is another vehicle. 4 mana for a 2/10 is some pretty silly stats, and having to crew 4 for that isn't great. It can certainly block relatively well, but most of the time you want to transform this. It has 10 toughness, just so that it can survive combat and transform into Conqueror's Foothold. Crew 4 is the hardest part about it. Once it transforms into Conqueror's Foothold, you have an insane value land in play. All of the effects on it are nice, and it is the kind of land that's just going to grind you out a win in a long game. Still, Crew 4 is a ton, and not always going to be doable depending on the board state, so I think this is a C+. Next, we have Dowsing Dagger, which for 2 generic is another equipment at rare. This one says, when Dowsing Dagger enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 2/0/2 green plant creature tokens with Defender, and then it also says equipped creature gets +2/+1, and it says whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may transform Dowsing Dagger. And it transforms into a land called Lost Veil that you can tap to add 3 mana of any color to your mana pool. I don't know why equipment has to be so medium these days. I feel like we haven't really had good equipment in Limited since like Shadows over Innistrad block. And I think this continues that trend. It's not that great. The stat boost it offers for a total investment of 4 mana isn't great, and giving your opponent 2 plant creatures seems like a real problem, especially for a card that has to have your creature do combat damage to transform. Sure, if you have lots of flyers or other evasive abilities in your deck, it does get a lot better, and the Veil is nice. Adding mana is great, but honestly, its usefulness can diminish as the game goes on unless you have a ton of mana sinks. Obviously, if you can transform it into Lost Veil, like on turn, I don't know, 4 or 5, you're going to be pretty happy, but that's sort of the ideal situation, and that's just not always what's going to happen. I think it's just a C. Next, we have Primal Amulet, which for 4 generic is a rare artifact, and it says instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And it also says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a charge counter on Primal Amulet. Then, if there are 4 or more charge counters on it, you may remove those cards and transform it. Once you transform it, it becomes Primal Wellspring, and it can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And when that mana is spent to cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to copy that spell and choose new targets for that copy. I like this card a lot, but it is sort of awkward in this set. There isn't really a spells deck that is well supported in it, and that's what this card wants. Tons of instants and sorceries. In fact, this set seems to really push towards playing creatures due to its tribal theme. Because of that, transforming this quickly isn't going to be easy. 4 charge counters is a ton, especially when the average limited deck in this format will probably run 4 or 5 instants and sorceries. Once it transforms, it still wants you to be playing lots of instants and sorceries, otherwise copying them doesn't make a difference. This just seems like the card was printed in the wrong set. If it was in the last set where we had a Spells Matter theme, this would be a lot higher graded, but I think it's just a D. If you can really succeed in getting instants and sorceries, obviously it's going to be powerful, but that's just going to be hard to pull off the way this set looks. Next, we have Mattock Compass, which for 2 generic mana is an artifact at rare. You can pay 3 and tap it to search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. And it says at the beginning of your end step, if you control 7 or more lands, transform Mattock Compass. So it transforms into Spire of Raska, which you can tap for 1 colorless. You can also tap it to untap target attacking creature an opponent controls and remove it from combat. So this provides you with fixing, which isn't too bad. Having a repeatable way to search up lands is going to be solid when you really need to hit lands. And the condition for this to transform will also incentivize you to search for lands. But getting to 7 lands is going to happen in a decent number of limited games anyway. Once this transforms, I think it's very powerful. It's basically Maze of Ith, and it can add mana to your mana pool. You can basically make your opponent unable to attack you with their best creature and grind the game to a shrieking halt while you find a way to win. I think this is a B-. Fixing is a big deal in this set already, and transforming this is a good way to help you win a game. Next, we have Treasure Map, which for 2 generic is a rare artifact and has 1, and you can pay 1 generic mana and tap it, and it says Scry 1. Put a landmark counter on Treasure Map, then if there are 3 or more landmark counters on it, remove those counters, transform Treasure Map, and create 3 colorless treasure artifact tokens with tap. Sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. It transforms into Treasure Cove, which can tap to add 1 mana to your mana pool, and you can tap it to sacrifice a treasure and draw a card. I think that this is the best of the artifact double-face cards in this set. Scrying 1 for 1 mana is a solid effect already when you can do it for multiple times, but this eventually transforms, and when it does, it gives you 3 treasures, which is actually some pretty insane ramp when you think about it. It basically gives you all your mana back that you used for scrying. Once it becomes Treasure Cove, it is perhaps the best treasure payoff in the set, since you can turn every treasure into a card. The fact that this is colorless makes it attractive in most decks, though I guess in an aggro deck it would be a little bit less ideal, since you would rather spend your mana playing creatures in the early game, not casting this and scrying, but still, I think this is first pickable. I think it's a solid B. Now, that's the end of all the artifacts. Let's look at the lands in the set. So we have the cycle of check lands returning, the allied colored cycle of them. They're all good, and if you find yourself wanting to splash or just in 2 colors one of these has, they're going to be worth spending a pick on relatively early. I don't like first picking lands like these, but by pack 2 and 3, when it's clear what colors you are in and whether you want to splash, I like the idea of taking them. I'm going to give them a B to reflect the fact that any deck in these colors would take them and be pretty happy, but I don't like taking them super early. Next, we have Field of Ruin, which is an uncommon land. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool, and it has an activated ability. You can pay 2 and tap it and sacrifice it to destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. Each player searches his or her library for a basic land card, puts it onto the battlefield, then shuffles his or her library. So this is basically unplayable main board. There just aren't enough non-basic lands in this format at lower rarities that are worth playing. It is worth bringing out of the sideboard against decks that have the powerful rares that can transform into lands, but you're not going to come up against that all that often. I think this is just an F in the main board and a C in the sideboard. It is worth noting you can sort of count it as a source of fixing, but you have to have the target non-basic land to kill in the first place to search for a basic land card. So it's only going to be fixing against opponents with lots of non-basic lands. Next up, we have Unclaimed Territory, which at Uncommon is a land, and it says, as Unclaimed Territory enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. You can tap it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. You can also tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and spend that mana only to cast creature spells of the chosen type. This is a great land, assuming your deck is a tribal one, which, as I said, is a safe assumption, as 8 of the color pairs in this set will be heavily tribal. It provides you with great fixing, which is going to be best for pirates and dinosaurs, as both of those factions go across 3 colors instead of just 2. I think this is a B-, a land worth taking relatively early and worth prioritizing in packs 2 and 3 once you're sure what your deck's going to look like. Next, we have Unknown Shores, which is one we've seen before. It's a common land. You can tap it to add 1 colorless to your mana pool. You can also pay 1 and tap it to filter. You get to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Filter lands are pretty mediocre. Spending a mana to make a colored mana is only worth it if you're desperate for fixing. Every other source of fixing in the set is basically better. And being desperate in this set for fixing doesn't seem like it's going to happen that often, with this set perhaps being one of the sets with the most fixing in it ever across all colors. I'm going to give this a D-. You'll only play it if you somehow whiffed on all the fixing and you're trying to splash an off-color bomb. You certainly shouldn't be playing it in a 2-color deck at all. So that does it for all the cards in Ixalan. I hope you enjoyed seeing my early thoughts on all of them. In the comments, let me know, if you disagree with anything or if you have any questions. Remember to subscribe if you want to see more limited reviews in the future, and the rest of this one as well. I'll be back tomorrow with my archetype guide, and that'll be the end of the limited review. And then soon, starting next week, I'll start posting draft videos of the new format. Also, my content is sponsored by 5colorcombo.com, a great website for all things Magic. You can go to their store and enter my discount code NEEDZone5 for a 5% discount, and they also have a great app for practicing drafting Ixalan, or any older format too, as you can see here. And you can download that in the App Store if you put in 5-color combo. It uses my grades to help determine when the AI will pick cards, so it's a pretty accurate representation of draft. Good way to practice drafting if you're on the bus or whatever. So, thanks for watching.